We will now proceed with the commemorative ceremony for the victims of terrorism. We will begin by welcoming the Secretary General and the Chargé d'Affaires of the United States. Buglers will then play taps, after which we will observe a minute of silence beginning at 14:46, corresponding to 8:46 New York time, when the first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. We will now observe a moment of silence. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, will now proceed with his commemorative address.
Mr. Jones, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen. Today we mark the 20th anniversary of the tragic events on September 11th, a day that shocked the world. 2,977 innocent people were killed that morning in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. We remember them and we honor them, just as we remember all those who have been killed in other terrorist attacks. From Paris to Baghdad, from Ankara to Christchurch. We remember all those who have died fighting terrorism, whose service and sacrifice have made our world a safer place. 9/11 represents the worst of humanity, but it also brought out the best. From the first responders who went into those buildings to the medics who saved countless of lives, and the ordinary men and women who helped their fellow citizens. Within 24 hours of the attack, NATO allies invoked Article 5 for the first time, our mutual defense clause that states that an attack on one ally is an attack on every ally. Shortly after, NATO surveillance planes were patrolling American skies. The 9/11 attacks were organized by Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. NATO went in to prevent the country from serving as a safe haven for terrorists who could threaten us once again. And over the past 2 decades, no terrorist attacks against NATO allies have been organized from Afghanistan. The dramatic developments of the past weeks are a tragedy for the Afghan people and heartbreaking for all of us who have supported them over these 2 past decades. We must ask these difficult questions about our engagement and reflect on the lessons learned. At the same time, we must preserve the gains we made in the fight against terrorism. We must hold those in power in Afghanistan to their commitments on terrorism, human rights, including the rights of women, and safe passage for Afghans at risk. The fight against terrorism will continue, and NATO will continue to play its part as the only place where Europe and North America come together every day for our shared security. Working together in the global coalition, we have brought an end to the ISIS control in Iraq and Syria. We must continue to support Iraq to ensure they cannot return and help other partners to strengthen their own efforts against terrorism. Terrorism comes in many different forms. Different ideologies and religions may be used as a disguise, but ultimately it is always about the same thing: violence, hatred, and intolerance. We will never forget that morning when our world changed. We will never forget those who lost their lives. And we will hold in our hearts all those who have been wounded, and all those who have lost loved ones and who are still grieving today. 20 years ago, we stood together in solidarity. And today, as we face a more dangerous world, North America and Europe must continue to stand together in NATO. Because whatever happens, we are safer when we are united.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Douglas Jones, Chargé d'Affaires of the United States on the North Atlantic Council, will now proceed with his speech.
"20 years ago, I was a relatively new diplomat working at our embassy in Sarajevo. I was in the office when I first learned of the attack on the World Trade Center in New York. Work stopped. We all gathered around the television and watched in disbelief at what was happening on the other side of the world, back at home in the United States. Most of us will never forget where we were at that moment. The events of September 11 transformed my nation and our world. Today, we remember the deadliest terror attack ever carried out on American soil, and we pay our respects to the nearly 3,000 innocent lives lost. This memorial of twisted steel behind me is a tribute to those individuals, but it is also a symbol of the strength and resilience of our alliance. NATO allies stood with us in our darkest hour, just as America has stood with Europe over the past century. September 11 is a national day of mourning in the United States. But at NATO, we remember what happened next, here in Brussels. Just hours after the attacks, it was our closest friends from across the Atlantic and from Canada who pledged to help us in our time of need and to meet a new type of threat, a terrorist attack. While this was not the sort of armed attack that was foreseen in 1949, NATO performed as its founders intended, and in the process proved itself critical to America's security in ways we never anticipated. The invocation of Article 5 demonstrated the power of collective security, that we are stronger standing together than we are alone. 20 years later, as the world has become more complex, our unity has only become more essential, and we have become stronger. Together, we shoulder the responsibilities required to keep our nation safe and prosperous. Our alliance enables us to secure our people and defend the democratic values that bind us together. NATO is the only place where North American and European democracies meet daily to address shared security challenges together. Through regular consultations or over informal coffee discussions, we'd make decisions together. Over the past 70 years, we have not only ensured peace and prosperity across Europe, but we have adapted together to meet new threats and challenges. We stood together in the former Yugoslavia, in Libya, and off the coast of Africa. Together, we have trained military forces in Iraq. And together, we created an enhanced forward presence in the East and coordinated our response during the early days of the pandemic. The last few weeks have been difficult for many of us. I know many of you have spent time in Afghanistan. I myself spent a year leading the civilian side of a provincial reconstruction team in Jalalabad, and the tour left a lasting impression. The United States is grateful to you, our allies, for your contributions in Afghanistan. We went in together to prevent that country from becoming a safe haven for terrorists to threaten our nations, and we fulfilled that goal. But the price was steep. Today we mourn all the men and women who lost lives in Afghanistan. 2,352 Americans and 1,145 from NATO allied and partner nations. And we remember the 13 brave service women and men who lost their lives guarding the airport in Kabul just last month. And we remember the innocent Afghan victims killed in that cowardly attack. Moving forward, the United States pledges to work with you to promote a stable Afghanistan and that the Afghan people deserve. As the Secretary General said, the fight against terrorism will continue, and NATO has an important role to play. The United States, working with allies, will be building on the lessons of the last 20 years. We will not relent in the fight against terrorism. We will continue our focus on counterterrorism, and we will expand our work beyond military action. We will build global partnerships like the successful de-ISIS coalition. We will invest in diplomacy, development, and prevention efforts both at home and abroad that can fundamentally make it harder for terrorists to thrive and recruit. The world has become infinitely more complicated since 2001, but I, for one, am optimistic about what we will achieve together. Just 3 months ago at the Brussels summit, we agreed to modernize our alliance. Our work on the strategic concept will guide the alliance in addressing enduring threats and new challenges. Standing shoulder to shoulder, we will continue to tackle transnational threats like terrorism, malicious cyber and hybrid activity, and climate change. And our mutual commitment to Article 5 remains the bedrock of each ally's transatlantic security. Secretary Blinken said during his first visit here in March, "We know we can accomplish far more when we work together. No one country and no one continent can deal with these challenges alone." Just as NATO was the answer to our collective peace and prosperity 72 years ago, I believe that NATO is as relevant and necessary as ever in the face of an ever-changing world. Our transatlantic alliance is as crucial to confronting the challenges of 2021 as it was to facing the challenges of 1949 or 1989 or September 11, 2001. And two things remain constant. There will always be those who seek to harm us for what we stand for, and we will always be able to count on each other as members of the strongest alliance in modern history. Your presence here today is a testament to our resolve, our unity, our friendship. We will never forget. Thank you for standing with us to remember.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the ceremony.